Keep the fire blazing, got to keep it bright. The Babylon is burning down and crumbling our sight. The Babylon is burning down and crumbling our sight.
No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. But the Congo chant, yo. Keep the fire blazing now. Got to keep it bright. Check it out. Aspect is Fire represented for the Coronation podcast. You know what I mean? Right now, I'm checking in. Yeah. No, it's a long time. Oh, no, see me. You see me? NATO's expansion into Africa. That what I talk about. This video that I will be showing you from time to time is from Breakthrough News Zine, and it features Rania Khaled and Vijay Prashad, right? And before we kick it off, I just want to mention real quick who Vijay Prashad is, so you can know now. Vijay Prashad is Executive Director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research and author of many books, including Washington Bullets, A History of the CIA, Coups and Assassinations. Zane, so you know who he is right now. And yeah, the man have enough things to say about NATO and its expansion into Africa and its effects on Libya and all of them things there, right? Their involvement with Ukraine, US involvement with Ukraine, all of that. Very informed brother. Now, real quick, let's check out this video clip and then we'll take it forward to what I say about the whole situation. Zine, some little breakdown, some little takes, you know what I mean? Could check it out.
Well, after World War II, the United States was seeking a kind of global force projection around particularly the Soviet Union, and then after 1949, the People's Republic of China. So the United States operated to build a set of treaty organizations. In 1949, the first of these treaty organizations was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO.
So Vijay is saying essentially you have NATO, which was designed by the US to project their strength into Europe and around the world, right? To show their might to the Soviet Union, you know, that this is how much people we have on our side, how much nations we have on our team, right? This is how much people stand with us ideologically. Now, they created many treaty organizations. In 1949, the Manila Pact, Baghdad Pact, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. A number of them were started them time there. You know what I mean? Strategic moves, seeing NATO being the first. Now, let's put things into context if you don't know. All right, it's 2 years into the so-called Cold War, and the US, right, as well as say, as a strategic move to solidify their powers in the East, they formed various treaties with nations around the world. This Cold War, as we call it, was essentially an ideological war. Zane, capitalism, which is what the US stood with, versus communism with the Soviet Union. Zane, so capitalism says that economies should be based on private ownership of the means of production and the pursuit of profit. You know what I mean? It should be driven by the free market and competition, right? And communism is a system where the government controls the means of production and distributes them according to the needs of the nation. You know what I mean? Needs of the people, the general collective, right? It's based on collective ownership. Now, really and truly, you know, one can easily argue that ideologically these are not two perfect concepts. So how we ending up in physical war? The thing is, it gets way deeper than that, right? Because it's probably not just tied to that ideology, but it's really and truly what type of economies do these ideologies produce? You know, when we think about who wants to be the global force, the dominant, you know, world power. European nations have been vying for global dominance from ever since, right? It has been this race between various European nations, hundreds of years and more, for global dominance. You see me? Like the man them must say, yo, let's race to see who can control the world first. You know? Control the world with ideology, control the world economically, control the world militarily, you know what I mean? Technologically. Get deep. So to get back to NATO now, Vijay said the US set up NATO along with these other treaties, right, to solidify themselves, right? Now, when we think about what a treaty is, Zine, if you want to look it up, a treaty is a binding formal agreement that establishes obligations between two or more subjects of international law or international organizations. And these treaties basically were set up strategically by the US, so the nations have binding agreements with them and vice versa. You know what I mean? Very smart and strategic move. You know what I mean? Yeah, so what Vijay and Rania go on to talk about is the fact that although NATO was set up, right, for the Soviet Union, to combat the Soviet Union, they continued to expand their operations. Years after the Soviet Union fell in 1991, they ended up in the so-called Middle East and then in Africa. Yeah, Mama Africa. So that's where we take it up, right, from when them land on that side of the world and decide to expand, as Vijay calls it.
I mean, there was no reason for NATO really to get involved in Libya in 2011. We can talk about the reasons for the involvement, but it was a major out of area involvement because, look, Libya didn't attack any NATO country. It didn't, trigger the NATO charter. NATO simply, as a act of, in a sense, aggression, attacked Libya.
And you see, this is why nations in the so-called Middle East and Africa have always had a problem with Western involvement in their political affairs, right? Because it usually doesn't help to solve the problem long term, and it usually comes with more cons than pros, according to many of these nations, if you check the history, right? So it's like, from these people's perspective, why are you here? What is your purpose? We don't necessarily need you, but to divide and rule, as we say, is their only plan. You know what I mean? That is what we're seeing happening, and we see happen many times over and over. That's the way the war is fought, right? So they land there, and we see what ends up happening. As he says, an illegal war of aggression, totally uncalled for, when you check it out.
Actually, that war of aggression in 2011 sets in motion a discussion inside NATO headquarters to basically become the global policeman. So in the early months of 2011, there was certainly unrest in the city of Benghazi, which is in the eastern flank of Libya, toward the Egyptian border. Well, as a consequence of that unrest, sections of the Libyan military defected to the protesters, and a civil conflict broke out, which had a military aspect.
It was a conflict that broke out between Air Force pilots who defected, right, from the government to protesters. Right, they started to protest against the government, and those who were still loyal to the government in Tripoli. During which time, though, there were discussions at the United Nations on whether there should be an intervention, because them sister things about to get heated, right? And I think to note is that in 1970, the UN passed a resolution that said no arms shipments should happen to any side of this conflict, right? However, there was aggressive war being pushed by NATO in this case, right? And the UN at the time was basically saying, no, we're not trying to, we are, as the UN, are not trying to endorse any type of war. We want to see how we can bring some type of resolution, at least slow the thing down, don't make it get out of hand. So while the UN are deliberate, the African Union joined in and empaneled a peace mission prepared to go to both sides of the conflict and see if they could find some type of peace agreement. The French and US government, led by Obama, circumvented the peace mission to Libya, grounded the plane, got it out of harm's way, and then proceeded to bomb Libya to smithereens, the man, I say, right? So when we look into this situation called NATO's expansion into Africa, let's start out with NATO's war of aggression, as Vijay calls it, right, as it relates to Libya, which essentially undermined the African Union as an instrument of peacemaking on the continent. Because remember, the African Union was going straight to Libya to create peace, right? And NATO jumped in and said, no, we got this. And that led to a war. They actually parked the plane that was going to create peace, and they allowed war to continue because they themselves were the ones dropping the bombs. All right, cool. Now, he's also saying that another outcome of NATO's involvement in Africa, part of their expansion, is that it destroyed Libya because the French and the US, under the cover of NATO, bombed Libyan state institutions to smithereens. Like, they targeted state institutions, leaving the government who came after with destroyed infrastructure. And now, 12 years later, Libya still don't have a stable economy, right? And one of the main reasons for that was the nature of the bombing of Libya in and of itself, according to Vijay Prashad, right? A third outcome of the war was also that the US essentially flew in right-wing jihadists from Turkey and across the Syrian border, etc., to be frontline forces, right? Frontline troops against Mr. Gaddafi's forces. And although some of them were Libyan Islamic fighting groups, right, like the ones that manifested earlier, right, in Libya, he still had other fighters that they brought forward, hardcore fighters that they shipped in by aircraft and whatever from other regions, as I said, Turkey and them regions, they into Benghazi to fight on the front lines, right? And once NATO's part of the war was done, these mercenaries had nothing to do. They had nowhere to be in that space. So they went back home. These mercenaries packed up. And, Libya was in chaos at the time. So these people who came from Algeria and in place, they went back home, back into the north of Africa, in the Maghreb region, as them call it. Some gone in the south, some gone in the the middle area, them side there, right? And they go down in Mali, as I said, Niger. They start destabilizing the region. Suddenly you have Al Qaeda in the Maghreb region, as he's saying, which was never heard of before, right? He also mentions the Tuareg people, the Tuareg wars in Mali between the sedentary and the nomadic people, right? The nomadic communities that existed for a long time there and have been in conflicts for a long time, right? Now suddenly these same conflicts seem to get wrapped up in some type of Al-Qaeda franchise, as the man call it, right? And then these forces coalesce and go into the south and into areas what we know as Timbuktu, creating trouble down them side there. And this is when now in 2013, you fast forward 2 years to 2013, you have the French who appear, with them sly self, appear, make a big show of their appearance, right? I made a big deal of their intervention to block the entry of Al-Qaeda from taking over Mali, right? Like, look at how we're saving you guys from Al-Qaeda. You can trust us, We're only coming with our army to save you guys and some investors and, we want some resources. But he's saying this becomes a door for the US and the French to intervene into the whole Sahel region. You know what I mean? And then the French now create a group called the G5 Sahel, which unites 5 countries in the Sahel, which allow for more French footprint in them area in Africa, right? He also says the rise of Boko Haram, he's seeing it as also related to this destabilization, right? It's a product of this destabilization of Africa.
Iraq, the amount of US weapons that went in there and then disappeared, into the so-called black market. It's not really a black market. You can walk into well-known places in Beirut and buy all kinds. You can go into these people's homes and you can ask them for a rocket launcher, and they show it to you. They open a closet, and there in the closet is a RPG. They say, "How many of these do you want?" I mean, it's not a really a samizdat market. It's pretty open thing. And so, they're all American weapons because the US is flooding the world with weapons. I think Chris Hedges put it very well. Terrorism isn't destroying the Middle East, it's the weapons industry.
Yeah, so this reminds me of a reasoning I was having with Brother Fakir Amlak on one of the prior episodes, Zane, of the Coronation podcast. We were reasoning about the people who really benefit, the ones who really profit from these wars, right? It's not the 9 to 5 everyday person. It's the manufacturers of these weapons, right? The processors are the raw materials that go into making these weapons, the technology and such, right? The chips, all the components that go into, making these various machines of war and death and destruction, right? These are the people who profit at the end of the day and are behind the flood of weapons that we see happening in these countries. So when you see, the complaint of these floods, of the flooding of weapons into these countries, when you see all of that happening, don't think it's just a random byproduct of the war them were going, right? The flood of these weapons, all of these weapons ending up on the black market cannot just be a byproduct of a random byproduct of these wars. When you think about it, Zane, a lot of money is made. It's big business. A lot of money is being made, right? Legally and illegally, right? And sometimes it's the same people making money on both ends. You know what I mean? You start the war and then you sell guns to both sides of the war. It's genius. You know what I mean? Yeah, man. Always can make money selling guns at a gunfight. Selling guns in a war. Very profitable. You know what I mean? So them thing that we say are go on is not buck-ups. It's not happenstance. They also discuss the fact that there's been a flood of weapons into Africa, which has created its own economy, right? This flood of weapons is essentially from the Western nations' intervention into African affairs, right? Which led to the creation of mercenaries as well. You see me? So it get deep, Virgin. It get deep. This black market, of weapons and mercenaries for hire. You know what I'm saying? It can literally buy an army, rent an army. You know what I mean? Yeah. Some serious stuff, yo. But make us stick a pin, right? Because even recently doing some reading, some more updates on this whole issue, right? I found out that even Putin, an article came out recently from Reuters that says, Putin himself was saying Western weapons from Ukraine are ending up in the hands of the Taliban. See, it's like they met them away from the black market straight into the hands of the Taliban. See, so let me just check out the article there real quick. I'll read it for you guys and we can move on. So Reuters, November 6, 2023, Putin says some Western weapons for Ukraine are ending up in the Taliban's hands. Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Friday that some Western weapons supplied to Ukraine were finding their way in the Middle East through the illegal arms market and being sold to the Taliban. It says here, now they say weapons are getting into the Middle East from Ukraine. Well, of course they are, because they are being sold, Putin said. And they are being sold to the Taliban, and from there they go into wherever. Okay. Since Russia sent troops into Ukraine on February 24 last year, Western powers have sent Ukraine tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons in an attempt to defeat Russian troops. Ukraine says it keeps tight control over any weapons supplied to it, but some Western security officials have raised concerns, and the United States has asked Ukraine to do more to tackle the broader issue of corruption. In June 2022, the Secretary General of Interpol, Jürgen Stock, warned that some of the weapons sent to Ukraine could end up in the hands of organized crime groups. See, and in 2023 now, we see where that is happening. I mean, it's been happening from 2022. Anyways, and earlier, this is not a new thing. Matter of fact, we know that. It's not a new thing. Now, the article says, a report about the Ukraine war and the illegal arms trade by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime said in March that there was currently no substantial outflow of weapons from the Ukrainian conflict zone. However, every precedent suggests that especially if the threat is not addressed proactively and imaginatively when the current war ends, Ukraine's battlefield could and will become the new arsenal of anarchy, arming everyone from insurgents in Africa to gangsters in the streets of Europe, the report said. The 8 biggest Western donors to Ukraine, led by the United States, have made military commitments to Ukraine totaling at least 84 billion euros, which is 90 billion US dollars, according to the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, which tracks donors. U.S. military support includes 160 155mm howitzers, 109 Bradley fighting vehicles, and more than 111 million rounds of small arms ammunition and 38 high mobility artillery rocket systems. Armed. Know what I mean? Well armed. Alright, so with all these billions of euros worth of weapons, won't they have more than they need to fight this war? Right? And with the corruption that exists in every nation, when you have a surplus, even when you don't have a surplus, even when there's an inadequacy, you find say man extra corrupt, even more so than when there's a surplus. But here you have it, the man them have more gun than them need. I mean, it's only expected that you're going to see a lot of these weapons ending up on the black market. It's only a matter of time before these weapons end up in the hands of some poor people in the Middle East and Africa. You know what I mean? And them things that we talk about. History leave us all the clues, to explain why the situations at present are the way how they are. Yeah, man. And that was just, November the 6th. Even Putin is saying that, flood of weapons are ending up on the black market, which is creating more destabilization in our beloved Africa, Mama Africa. You know what I mean? 'Cause of course, that's the main reason why we're talking about this. The flood of weapons, the destabilization of Africa, the further destabilization of Africa. Yeah, man. So we have to keep an eye on these things and watch it. You know what I mean? And see what's going on with NATO's involvement in these conflicts. You know what I mean? From them time that to now and going forward, anytime we see NATO associated with anything in Africa, we should be like, what's going on over there? What's going on? You know what I mean? Alright, so we see 2 examples, right, from a nation that is standing up against Western forces who insist on being involved in their nation, right? So Burkina Faso is one such nation, and we see where they have been fighting back against France, man. They want the French out of their nation. See, France has been in there for a long time. They want them out. Now, one such thing that they have done to kind of establish that, we're cutting ties, they ended the French military involvement in their land, French military operations on their soil, if you want to call it that. Yeah, Burkina Faso marked the official end of French military operations on its soil, February of this year. Adding to that, in December, just some days ago, the Burkinabe government adopted a bill revising the constitution and henceforth enshrining national languages as official languages. People have the various languages that they speak in this place. You know what I mean? So I have to give Burkina Faso enough respect for that. Yeah, man. Relegating French to the rank of working language. You know what I mean? Yeah. It doesn't need to be the language of the aristocracy. The new language of the aristocracy is going to be the language of the people, according to Burkina Faso. And that will love her, that will depend, you know what I mean? Yeah, man. So you have many African nations that are standing up against these kind of moves, like what NATO has been doing over the years, and you know what France has been doing in places like Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali. You know what I mean? Yeah. So we give thanks for that, and we need to see more nations standing up. I love how Ibrahim Traore is really staying solid, you know what I mean, as a young man who leading him nation too. It's like, man, you know, real solid warrior, you know what I mean, getting the French out of his country and trying to establish more unity within Africa, more African nations working with each other to, you know, raise their economies out of this European bondage that it has been in for so long, right? So many African economies are tied to European economies in some type of way, right? And depend in some type of way on European investment, etc., 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 right? Which has always come at a very high price. See? And so when we talk about NATO's expansion into Africa, we talk about a course of more than 10 years. It's been a long time. You know what I mean? They started with the Middle East, you know what I mean? And then they went down into Libya, yeah, and the rest of Africa, right? So it's a ongoing situation as well, you know. And as I say, hats off to the brothers and sisters who are leading the various African nations, fighting against, you know, foreign invasion, foreign involvement every minute in their politics, right? They have the African Union. They can govern themselves. They don't need anybody else. Because remember, you know, this group was created to defend Western European nations as well as the Western world, right? US, Canada, specifically in the West, right? Against the Soviet Union. So you have Canada, the US, and these European nations who banded together to defend themselves against the Soviet Union. Now the Soviet Union fell in 1991, but they still continued to push on with this movement, this organization, this alliance, as they say, right? Found themselves in the Middle East, in Africa, you know, and what was already a destabilized nation, what was already a destabilized continent, was further destabilized. See, and a them thing that we watch and observe, monitor, talk about, share. Yeah, we could go on and on, you know. We could go on and on, but let's keep our eye on what's going on as it relates to NATO's involvement in these African nations and what these African nations are doing to regain their sovereignty in all ways possible. Know what I mean? Yeah, man. Corify checking out again. The Coronation Podcast, you know what I mean? Blessings. Oh yeah, do remember to like, subscribe, share if you like this content, you know what I mean? And hit the notification bell. I don't always post consistently. So if you hit the notification bell, you can get a notification anytime I post something. You see me? Boom.
Keep the fire blazing now, got to keep it bright. Till Babylon is burning down and crumbling our sight. Don't let the system change you now. Let the system be braver now. Don't let the system be braver now. Don't let them take your crown. Don't let the system change you now. Be wiser and be braver now. Don't let the system take your crown. Don't let the system change you now. Don't let the system change you now. Let the system be braver now.